Let me sing a little bit more from the Irish tradition, because so many people today forget exactly how strong was the contempt for the Irish 100 years ago. They called them dirty, they called them ignorant, they called them papists, and it came into many a song. We got a pig in the parlour, we got a pig in the parlour, we got a pig in the parlour, and he is Irish too. A famous fiddle tune called the Pigtown Fling. Even the Irish washerwoman used to have verses like, "Did you ever go into an Irishman's shanty where water was scarce and whiskey was plenty?" And to the Irish people listening, pardon me for singing these kind of songs, but I want to get the historical record out. I'm glad to say that in the 100 years, this situation has, of course, been changed. The Irish power did something. And I'm skipping very lightly through our history, come up to the days of the Wobblies. Called them the I Won't Works. IWW, International Workers of the World. They once had about 300,000 enthusiastic members in days just before and just after World War I. And to every man they signed up, they not only gave him a little membership card, but a little red book full of songs. On the outside it said, "To fan the flames of discontent." And it was one of the Wobblies who made up the song which today the most respectable labor people still sing. Solidarity forever, solidarity forever, solidarity forever, for the union makes us strong. Their most famous songwriter, Joe Hill, was accused of murder and shot in Utah in 1916. But his songs kept on going. You will eat by and by in that glorious land above the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die. To people who know the original song, I should again beg your pardon, because this is probably offensive. The original hymn was called In the Sweet By and By. But the church in those days was very antagonistic to the organized working people. Not always, but sometimes they'd be preaching over here on saying, don't pay any attention to those wild Wobblies, come to Jesus. And while they were singing In the Sweet By and By, the Wobblies would have their own soapbox, and they'd be singing their own words. Long-haired preachers come out every night, try to tell you what's wrong and what's right, but when asked about something to eat, they will answer with voices so sweet. You will eat by and by in that glorious land above the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die. They put new words to the famous hymn, Take It to the Lord in Prayer. Are you poor, forlorn, and hungry? Are there lots of things you lack? Can't remember the line here. Dump the bosses off your back. Coming up, though, to the 1930s, an interesting thing happened. The labor movement, again, took a lot of melodies from the gospel church, but their words were not anti-church. They simply emphasized a militancy that had long been there, but they emphasized it. And so it was that in the 1930s, you could find not one, not two, but dozens of songs made up to hymn tunes. Instead of roll the chariot on, it became, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on. Instead of that old ship of Zion, what is that I see coming, coming? It's the old ship of Zion, Zion, Zion. It's that Union train a-comin', comin', comin'. It's that song. It'll save to many a thousand. It was actually the same song, but it now is a Union song instead of a Protestant Christian song. The most famous one of all, I don't know who made it up, but it was undoubtedly made up by Negro Union members in the South. Instead of Jesus is my captain, I will not be moved, they changed that I to we. Very important change. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. It's the same change was made. Instead of the old hymn, I will overcome, it became we will overcome. And now, in the last few minutes of the first half of this evening's program, I'll get down to the nitty-gritty, as they say. Because the fundamental problem, as you know and I know, in the United States right now and in many parts of the world, is, are the light-skinned people of the world going to treat the dark-skinned people of the world as human beings or as something less than human beings? And so the next 15 minutes will be circling around this question, which I call the white problem. The interesting thing is that when it comes to songs, the element of protest is often so subtly and artistically interworked within the song that it's not apparent to the average white listener. The folklorist John Greenway wrote a whole book called American Folk Songs of Protest. When he came to songs of the Negro people, he said, well, it's funny that the Negro people don't really have any protest songs. He really made this statement, and the reason was that he couldn't find any songs like the Irish songs I've sung you, or like the Union songs. And when he came along to a song in a book that said, did my Lord deliver, Daniel deliver, Daniel deliver, Daniel, did my Lord deliver, Daniel, and why not every man? He just turned the page and said, well, of course, that's not really a protest song. I think it's now generally recognized, though, that the Negro people in the South seized upon the Bible, the Old Testament especially, with the story of Moses, and And maybe the slave owner, of course, he gave him the Bible and said, now, read this where it says, obey thy master. But then he walked back and he left the Bible, and they turned over the page, and they read, Moses freed the slaves. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Hey, you know what? This is too good a song not to sing all the way through. Sing it with me. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Now, we need a little harmony. This kind of song is not a song unless you have a little harmony. You wouldn't want to play tennis just with one person, and you can't sing this song with just one melody either. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. How about a few basses, altos? Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. That's a little bit low. Let's go a little. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Pharaoh's army got drowned. That's a very important note. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Basses, you are the rock foundation of this glorious, glorious edifice. Don't collapse or we'll all fall on top of you. Try that again. Low women as well as low men. Here we go. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Now, it's every man and woman for themselves. If you hear too many people singing low, you sing high. And if too many people sing high, you sing low. And some people slither in between, have a good time on the melody. Here we go, the melody, oh Mary, high part, oh Mary. Oh Mary is the bass and alto. 1, a 2. Oh Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Oh Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Pharaoh's army got drowned. If I could, I surely would stand on the rock where Moses stood. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Oh, Mary. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Mary wore 3 links a chain. Every link was freedom's name. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Oh, Mary. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Here's the greatest verse of all, you know. This really is the greatest verse in all American folklore. I think the greatest verse in the world, maybe. Just me, that's my own prejudiced opinion. Because this verse might have been written by some, invented by some illiterate person 100 years ago, 120. But this person made up a verse for the whole poor damn human race that is still trying to learn to live together. God gave Noah the rainbow sign. No more water, fire next time. Hell's coming up around. Oh, Mary, oh, Mary, oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Hell's coming up around. Oh, Mary, sing it again now, sing it out now. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you mourn. Hell's coming up around. Oh, Mary, don't you I've sung that song before the most varied audiences in 24 countries of the world. And I really do believe that that verse is the greatest. God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water but fire next time. It keeps coming up again and again. And the whole question of peace is interwoven with the whole question of freedom. I'll give you some of my own prejudiced opinions on the subject, but let me be frank to say that I don't know all the answers. I've sung often a little ditty written by a young Canadian. And last night I had the strangest dream I never dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. I dreamed I saw a mighty room. The room was full of men, and the paper they were signing said they'd never fight again. And when the paper was all signed and 1,000,000 copies made, they all joined hands and bowed their heads, and grateful prayers were prayed. And the people in the streets below were dancing round and round, and swords and guns and uniforms were scattered on the ground. Last night I had the strangest dream I never dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed. I dreamed the world had all to put an end to war. I saw a mighty room. I dreamed I saw a mighty room was full of men. The room was full of men. The paper they were signing, and the paper they were said they'd never fight again. They'd never fight again. Last night I had the strangest dream. Last night. To people of this country just as much as you and I, and the whole world, most of the world, would like to see peace. People also want to see a little more justice. There's no doubt. Do you know that 200 million people in India get paid between 4.5 and 5 cents a day? I know that because there was an argument in the Indian Parliament when I was there 4 years ago as whether it was 4.5 cents or 5 cents. The people in the cities can make more money. A good carpenter can earn as much as 75 cents a day in Calcutta. But in the countryside, you just barely stay alive on a handful of rice, and you're only half alive. You can go through that country and see millions of people whose legs are no thicker than my wrist because they've lived their entire life on 5 cents a day. Well, we can say, isn't that terrible? But to a person who has lived that and sees us throw away food and waste things and spend billions of dollars trying to go to the moon and tens of billions of dollars trying to conquer Vietnam, they don't say, isn't that too bad? People are starting to grab bricks and throw them and other things they want to throw. And we say, we want peace. Give us justice, you'll get peace. I think peace will come, myself, when we recognize that crimes have been committed. The most modern methods of penal institutions and jurisprudence, I think, agree that the purpose of putting a man in jail, if there is any purpose, is to try and see that he doesn't go around robbing, raping, murdering anymore. And if a man truly is going to stop his robbing, murdering, and raping, usually the way is open for a parole. And this is true not only in our country, but many other countries. If you ever read the book by the two young Philadelphia Quakers who were imprisoned in China, accused of being United States spies, the whole book is an account of how they gradually, their confusion was gradually cleared up because they're thrown in jail. They said, how long are we in jail? And they said, until you realize that you have committed a crime. And I think, too, that once people are willing to admit that a crime has been done, this is a step in the direction of saying we will not commit such crimes as this in the future. I think one of the main things that we have to do is recognize that the European people came over and took this country by force, just as much as any other country in the world was ever taken by force. And this isn't going to say that I think everybody ought to go back to Europe. I agree with Godfrey Cambridge. He said to his nightclub audience, let's face it, you ain't going back to Europe and I ain't going back to Africa. But the crimes that go on, crimes of force and violence, where innocent children are killed, where innocent bystanders are killed, these will not stop. They'll keep on going on year after year until each side admits the existence of crimes. When Arabs admit that there has been such a thing as anti-Semitism, when Israelis admit that they walked into a country with 1 million people and decided that they were going to take over, when white people admit that for 300 years the dark-skinned people have not been treated like human beings. So, everybody knows about, let me tell you a little thing I just discovered 2 weeks ago reading a book of New York City history. You all know about the trial of John Peter Seeger, 1734. Great victory for freedom of the press. His newspaper had criticized the king's governor. The king's governor tried to throw him in jail. They had a trial, and the jury refused to convict him, and it was a landmark for freedom of the press in the United States. 1734 AD. 1741, the following events took place. New York City consisted of some 10,000 people, of which 2,000 were African slaves. Several slaves were accused of stealing and were sentenced to jail. That week, a house caught fire of a judge, and later on in the week, another house caught fire, and a rumor swept the little town that the slaves were planning a revolt. Several slaves were quickly questioned, and of course, after the custom of police officers everywhere, they said, "Now just tell us who's at the bottom of this and we'll spare you." And pretty soon, everybody was accusing everybody else. Within 3 months, 150 people were arrested, 70 were sold to slavery in the West Indies to get them out of the way. Some 14 were hung, some 17 were burned at the stake. This in a city of 10,000 people. Including, incidentally, 4 white people, one of them a Catholic priest, and he was accused of gathering Negroes in a circle and reading them devilish incantations, because in those days there were prohibitions against Catholics in most American colonies, with the exception of Maryland, I believe. And finally, it became apparent that no one really knew who was guilty of what, because everybody was accusing everybody else, and they just stopped throwing people in jail. That was the end of the slave revolt of 1741. We never even read of it in our history textbooks. How many of you ever read of that in your history textbook? Would you raise your hand if anybody had ever read of it? Not a single one of us, 1,000 people here. We all read about John Peter Seeger. Isn't it wonderful how Americans fight for democracy? We never once read about the crimes. Shucks, I suppose our country is no worse than any other. You read the history textbooks how the British burnt Washington in 1812, but it doesn't tell a thing how we went up and burnt Toronto. Poor Torontonians didn't do nothing to us, but we figured we're going to get back at those terrible British, so most of the Torontonians were Tories. We didn't like them anyway. You see, the British population of Canada was started off by the several 100,000 who fled the United States after 1776. And we just didn't like them up there, and we went up and burnt Toronto, but we don't mention it in our history textbooks much. It is now 9 o'clock, and I think I'll sit down and see what questions you have.